Everyone knows Tombstone, but 150 miles north, there was a town so much worse that Tombstone looked civilized. A single street that burned through one marshal after another, several of them killed within months of each other, until the town gave up on the law entirely. For 2 savage years, it was maybe the most dangerous place in the American West. And today, there is nothing left of it at all. Just foundations, a few graves, and the wind. This is Canyon Diablo. In 1880, the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad was racing across northern Arizona, laying track toward California mile after mile through empty high desert. The work moved fast until it reached the edge of Canyon Diablo. Here, the ground split into a gorge 500 feet across and more than 200 deep, a sheer-walled chasm the tracks could not simply cross. A bridge was needed, a great iron trestle to span the void. But when the ironwork was ordered, someone made a catastrophic mistake. The girders came in the wrong length, too short to bridge the gap. A new span would have to be fabricated and shipped, and that would take months. So the end of the track just stopped, dead, at the lip of the canyon. A railhead marooned in the middle of nowhere, with hundreds of idle, well-paid workers piling up behind it and nothing out there for 100 miles in any direction. In the American West of 1880, that was a formula, and everyone knew what it produced. Wherever a railroad paused, a town boiled up overnight to take the workers' wages. What grew at the edge of the Devil's Canyon, though, would become a byword for lawlessness even in an age that had plenty of it. Almost as soon as the track stopped, the town appeared. First tents, then rough plank buildings thrown up in a matter of days along a single dirt street beside the stalled railhead. There was no plan, no charter, no government, just opportunity and the men who came to feed on it. The railroad had hundreds of graders, teamsters, and laborers stuck here with money in their pockets and nothing to spend it on, and into that vacuum poured everyone who made a living off such men. Saloon keepers, gamblers, dance hall women, merchants selling whiskey at brutal markups, and behind them, the predators, con men, thieves, and gunfighters drawn to a place with cash flowing and no law at all. Because that was the defining fact of Canyon Diablo. It had no sheriff, no court, no jail, no authority of any kind. It sat far from any established county seat, beyond the reach of the territorial law, a town that existed for one purpose: to separate railroad workers from their pay, and answered to no one. In a place like that, the only law is the pistol on your hip, and Canyon Diablo's main street was about to earn its nickname. A town with money and no law does not attract quiet people. Canyon Diablo drew the hardest men in the territory, and it drew them for a reason. Here, a man with a price on his head could disappear. There was no sheriff to recognize a face, no telegraph running a description down the line, no jail waiting at the end of a bad night. For outlaws working the Arizona high country, it was close to a perfect refuge, a place to spend stolen money, lie low between jobs, and vanish into a crowd where everyone had a reason not to ask questions. The region around it was already infamous. This was the range of the Hash Knife outfit, the Aztec Land and Cattle Company, one of the largest cattle operations in the West, notorious for hiring on gunmen and rustlers whose loyalty ran no deeper than their next paycheck. Cattle thieves, train robbers, and killers moved through this country, and Canyon Diablo sat right in the middle of it like an open door. Add professional gamblers who cheated for a living, and the dance hall operators who profited off every dispute, and you had a population where a large share of the town made its living outside the law entirely. These were the men filling the saloons on Hell Street every night, and they had all come armed. They called the main drag Hell Street, and the name was honest advertising. In a matter of weeks, it filled end to end with saloons, gambling halls, dance houses, and brothels. By some accounts, more than a dozen saloons running on a single stretch of dirt, and they never closed. Day and night, the noise of pianos, shouting, and gunfire rolled up out of the canyon. There was no last call because there was no reason for one. The games and the drinking and the trade in flesh ran around the clock, feeding on shifts of workers and the steady traffic of the railhead. Whiskey flowed, money changed hands fast, and everyone, gambler, laborer, and gunman alike, went armed. It was a place with every ingredient for violence and nothing whatsoever to restrain it. Crowds of armed men, oceans of liquor, high-stakes gambling, and not a single lawman to answer to. On Hell Street, an argument over a card, a woman, or a misheard word did not end in a fistfight or a lawsuit. It ended again and again in gunsmoke, and another body carried up the hill to a graveyard that could barely keep pace. It became a grim boast across the territory that Canyon Diablo made Tombstone look like a church social, and Tombstone, remember, was no church social. Tombstone had the Earps and the gunfight near the OK Corral and a reputation for danger that has echoed for a century and a half. But Tombstone also had a sheriff, a newspaper, churches, a functioning town government, the machinery of order, however strained. Canyon Diablo had none of that. Here the killing was casual, constant, and almost entirely unpunished, because there was no one whose job it was to punish it. Men were shot over card games and left where they fell. Robberies happened in broad daylight. Bodies turned up in the morning with no inquiry, no arrest, no consequence. Because consequence required law, and law was the one thing this town had never bothered to build. For a brief, violent window, Canyon Diablo may have been the single most dangerous settlement in the entire American West. Not because its gunmen were more famous than anyone else's, but because absolutely nothing stood between them and the next killing. Eventually, the town made one attempt to change that. It tried to hire a marshal. Here, the history slides into legend, and the legend is one of the darkest in the West. The story, told and retold, goes like this. The first man appointed Marshal of Canyon Diablo was sworn in one morning and shot dead by that same afternoon. Some versions give him 5 hours on the job. Others say his grave was dug before nightfall, and he was only the first. The next marshal, the stories say, lasted barely longer, and the one after him, and the one after that, a string of lawmen who pinned on the star and were buried under it in a matter of hours or days, until the town simply gave up and stopped trying to hire anyone at all. Now, historians urge caution here. Canyon Diablo's records are thin, its legends grew tall in the retelling, and the buried within hours version is surely exaggerated. But the real story is grim enough on its own. Canyon Diablo genuinely burned through multiple marshals in a very short time, several of them killed within months of one another. The town really did devour its lawmen, just over months, not hours. And that legend grew from a real and simple truth. In a town with no law, no jail, and no shortage of killers, the man who volunteered to keep the peace wasn't wearing a badge of authority. He was wearing a target, pinned directly over his heart. Whatever the truth about the marshals, the graveyard does not lie. Canyon Diablo's boot hill filled with startling speed, and it filled almost entirely with men who died with their boots on, shot, stabbed, or hanged. Most were young. Most are nameless to us now, their stories gone with the town that made them. The cemetery was less a solemn resting place than a running tally of the street below it, a hillside record of just how fast Canyon Diablo consumed the men who came to it. Some accounts claim dozens of graves accumulated in a span of time that would shame far larger towns. The great majority of them violent deaths. Picture that. A settlement that existed for only a couple of years, barely more than a single street, generating enough killing to pack a graveyard on the hill above it. There were no lawmen to investigate the deaths, no courts to try them, no families often, even to claim the bodies. Men arrived, made or lost their money, and a fair number of them never left, except to be carried up the rise and put in the ground. One more anonymous cross on the hill over Hell Street. The lawlessness didn't stay confined to the town either. In 1889, after the railroad had finally bridged the canyon and the trains were running, 4 cowboys pulled off one of the most famous crimes of the Arizona frontier right here, the Canyon Diablo train robbery. They stopped an Atlantic and Pacific train, cracked the express car, and made off with a haul of cash, gold coin, watches, and jewelry. What followed became legend in its own right. The county sheriff, a young lawman named Bucky O'Neill, put together a posse and set out after them. And the chase did not stop at the county line or even at the territory's edge. O'Neill and his men tracked the robbers on horseback across hundreds of miles of desert and canyon, all the way up into Utah in one of the longest pursuits in the history of the Old West, some 600 miles before the outlaws were finally run down and captured. It's a story that captures exactly what kind of country this was. A place where the crimes were audacious, the distances enormous, and the men on both sides of the law tougher than the land they fought across. In the end, it wasn't a marshal or a court or a preacher that finally tamed Canyon Diablo. It was the bridge. When the correct ironwork at last arrived and the great trestle went up over the gorge, the thing that had created the town instantly destroyed it. The railhead was no longer stalled at the canyon's edge. The track laying rolled on west toward Flagstaff and beyond, and every reason for Canyon Diablo to exist rolled away with it. The idle workers moved down the line to wherever the work was now. The gamblers and saloon keepers, who followed money the way vultures follow the dying, packed up their tents and tables and chased the next boomtown. Within roughly 2 years of its violent birth, Canyon Diablo was finished. Hell Street went quiet. The saloons emptied and the lamps went dark. The plank buildings were hauled off to be reused elsewhere or simply left to the wind, which began, immediately and patiently, to take the town apart board by board and bury the rest in blowing sand. Go looking for Canyon Diablo today, and you will find almost nothing. A few stone foundations, the faint scar of a street, a scatter of graves on the hillside, their markers weathered to blank wood or gone entirely, being erased year by year by the same wind that took the town. There is no monument, no visitor center, no plaque for the tourists, because there are no tourists. It sits out in the empty country off the interstate, forgotten by nearly everyone. Just a mile or so from the ruins of two guns in its cursed death cave. Two dead towns on the same Devil's Canyon, within sight of each other, each destroyed by a different kind of reckoning. One was built on a massacre it could never outrun, and the other was simply too violent to be allowed to live. A town with no law, no restraint, and no future, that burned hot and fast like a struck match, and then went out just as quickly, leaving behind only a hillside of graves and a name that still means danger. Canyon Diablo, the Devil's Canyon.